Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Because Someone Had To, written by MachDhai. This is a 7-part series, and there will be a playlist listed down below. Also, head to the original story, do the update thing, and tell MachDhai that I sent you. Anyways, on to the story. Why? A Kiltan child, seated in the front row of a class of like-aged children from many races, had raised their primary limb to gain the teacher's attention. It was rare a child of such young age showed interest in galactic history. But when learning of the liberation of one's race by a species that has lost everything in the process, even a naive child's attention was captivated. The class's teacher was silent for a moment, studying the child that had asked the question. The Kiltan still bore the genetic markers from centuries of slavery and biological conditioning, but even after just a few generations of freedom, they were fading. The humans always answered that question the same way, because someone had to. The Terran ambassador has requested to speak before the council and has been granted the floor. You may speak. The speaker, a Kiltan elder, stood at the foot of the council's dais. The creature's chitin crest was gilded in rare metals and was draped in expensive robes. But it was little more than decoration, an expensive bauble flaunted by its masters, an impressive representative of his species, purchased and modified for the unique task of standing motionless and speaking a clear, unaccented galactic common, and capable of little else, at least in the eyes of the council's species. The Terran ambassador was an older man, dressed in a simple if well-tailored suit, and using an old wooden cane to counter the otherwise severe limp. The man approached the speaker's post, located near the Kiltan speaker, and stood still a moment to study the larger, albeit just as old creature in all its finery. "Thank you, Speaker. Council, I appreciate the opportunity to address the gathered signatory species." Members of the council were visibly irritated by the human's choice to address the speaker directly, and them second. But the humans were new to the Senate and held only a minor place. Likely this would be the first and quite possibly last time a human ambassador would be given the right to address the chamber. The various Senate members and representatives murmured and laughed at the human's crude behavior, but the old human simply stood leaning on his cane and waited for silence. The room died down in short order. Everyone had better things to do, and gossiping about the humans was not one of them. When silence reigned again, the human cleared his throat and finally spoke. "Humanity is a young species, compared to many here. A mere 300,000 and some years from our more recent evolutionary ancestors till now. In our history are many dark truths of our past, things for which we hold no pride, but from which we have drawn strength and wisdom." He glanced at the Kiltan speaker for a moment, then looked directly at the Roshinian representative. "Since joining the council and being granted a place in the Senate, albeit a minor one, our philosophers and lawmakers have pored over the laws and standards held by this ruling body." Humanity had arrived on the council's awareness a scant few years prior. Little was known of them, mostly due to apathy on the part of many of the signatory species and the council itself. They had met the minimum requirements for membership and had levied the mandated fees, and little more was expected of them. The private sector would sort out the fledgling race and likely drive them into crippling debt, as was so often the case with minor races. "We have known slavery. Only 300 years ago was the practice finally abolished entirely among my own people. We believe the practice abhorrent. The belief that any one lineage, nation, or species is inherently subservient is folly. We learned long ago that divisions from class based on race or gender simply limit the potential of the population." There were angry murmurs throughout the chamber. the council itself grew restless with simmering rage. That an upstart race in new petition to the assembly would make such a bold and aggressive statement. It was once believed that women were second-class citizens, that they should stay in the home, raise the children, and cook the meals, that they could not be scientists or politicians or doctors. It was once believed that the peoples of Africa were subhumans, capable of only mimicking civilized customs, and were suited to little outside of hard labor. Wars were fought among my own people to bring an end to such beliefs. Laws were passed on the basic requirements and rights of every human. Constitutions were rewritten. The angry rumbling of the assembled Senate grew, but were held from a full outburst by the staying hand of the Siluan's councillor, who glared with cold eyes at the small, frail human. As such, I've been directed by my leaders to put forth a motion to the council. He turned to face the council rather than the assembled Senate members. The practice of slavery is to be abolished, and all species given free and equal standing on the Senate. The worlds of their birth and any former colonies return to their own rule, and reparations be paid. Naturally, not something that can be achieved overnight. But we are prepared to offer economic boons and adjudication to help facilitate the transition. The ambassador's tone was straightforward and calm. No sense of sarcasm. It was as if the statement could only have one logical response from the Senate and Council, to accept the terms. The outrage boiled over. A mindless roar of accusations, threats, and insults spilled forth from the Senate onto the human ambassador, who simply stood leaning on his cane and studying the council. Then he turned his attention to the speaker, who simply stood staring at the old human in disbelief. He would not dare to hope, of course, but he could appreciate the words of what would soon surely be another enslaved species pressed into service of the council. As a gesture from the council species, the Senate quieted. The eldest of the council races stood then, a towering creature of scale hide and crooked fanged jaw. The Siluans have ruled the stars for thousands of your years. We have conquered a dozen empires before the council was even formed. Tell your leaders that no upstart younglings will dictate to the council. Yours shall be just another footnote in history, and your descendants shall work in change for their betters. The ambassador smiled at the speaker, then looked up at the Siluan's councillor. A young race we are, yes, but know this. 400 years ago, we landed on our whole world's moon. 20 years prior, we split the atom. 40 years before that, we discovered flight. We've known war without end for all of our 200 millennia of existence. And should you choose war, you shall quickly learn how far we have come from the first fire-hardened spear to now. 400 years ago, your grandfather sat in that chair, Counselor. He came to and from his palatial estate in that same luxury shuttle you use. He rested both hands on his cane and studied the council races, a hint of amusement showing through. 400 years ago, the same patrol vessels monitored your shipping lanes, as those same ships have 400 years before that, and likely would 400 years from now had nothing changed. You have been stagnant for thousands of years, counselors, peaked, crested, and contented. 300,000 years ago, my ancestors forged spears with branch and flame. Do you wish to learn what our spears look like today? Another sudden surge of violent outcry from the Senate. The councillors themselves driven to rage, and the human ambassador simply looked at the speaker again. The call for war echoed through the Senate, and was eagerly received by the council. But the human ambassador had known all along that there could have only been one outcome. Why? The speaker asked, and the ambassador simply smiled sadly. Because someone had to. End of chapter. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.